A storm rages outside, and inside the Winter Express, a passenger lies dead. But the murderer is still among us. Can Hercule Poirot uncover the truth before the train reaches its final stop? Watch closely, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you dare to uncover the secret. Chapter 1: The Snowbound Journey. The Winter Express hissed along the tracks like a silver serpent, gliding smoothly through the deep blanket of snow that covered the European countryside. Outside, the mountains rose sharply against the early twilight, their jagged peaks kissed with frost, and the sun, low on the horizon, painted the world in pale gold and icy blue. Inside the train, however, warmth and elegance reigned supreme. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed as always, sat in the observation car, hands neatly folded over his waistcoat. His small, precise eyes swept the compartment, noting each detail: the gleaming polished wood, the glint of crystal in the lamplight, the subtle fragrance of perfume drifting from the lady's carriage. Poirot enjoyed traveling in style. The rhythm of the train, the murmurs of passengers, the quiet anticipation of a long journey, all were perfect conditions for reflection and observation. Mon Dieu! He murmured softly to himself. So many human hearts, so many secrets, all contained in this moving palace. One must have patience, one must watch. Very soon, no doubt, something will disturb the apparent harmony of this journey. Across the aisle, a young woman in a fur-lined coat adjusted her gloves with a hint of nervousness. Her eyes darted occasionally toward a tall man sitting near the window, his fingers drumming on the armrest. The man, Victor Harrington, carried an air of wealth and confidence, yet Poirot noticed a flicker of unease behind his dark eyes. It was subtle, easily overlooked by the casual observer, but never by Poirot. The other passengers of the Winter Express were a collection of contrasts. Lady Selina Whitmore, a widow of distinguished bearing, sipped her tea with a faintly disdainful air, casting occasional glances at the bustling staff. Professor Emile Braun, a historian of some renown, was engrossed in a leather-bound notebook, jotting observations in precise, flowing script. James O'Connell, an English journalist with a perpetual twinkle of curiosity in his eyes, moved from car to car, apparently observing everything. And in the corner, Anna Petrova, a Russian pianist traveling to Vienna for a performance, sat quietly, her dark eyes distant yet alert. Poirot's gaze returned to Victor Harrington. "Something is amiss," he said softly. "Attention, subtle yet insistent. The man is like a kettle about to whistle. And when men are nervous, there is sometimes a reason that is hidden, yes, but important." Dinner that evening was a quiet affair, filled with polite conversation and the occasional clink of fine china. Poirot observed without participating, letting the others speak, while his mind catalogued every expression, every tone, every gesture. He noticed the way Clara Harrington, Victor's young wife, laughed too brightly at her husband's jokes, almost as if to mask something. He noticed the tension in Professor Braun's shoulders, as though the very act of being on this train weighed upon him. Even Lady Selina's casual remarks had a pointedness that suggested more than social politeness. After dinner, the observation car filled with the soft glow of lamplight. Poirot remained seated, a cup of fragrant tea in his hands, as the train plunged into a night of heavy snow. Outside, the storm had begun, and the tracks ahead disappeared into a haze of white. It was beautiful. It was serene. And yet, Poirot felt the familiar stirrings of unease. Within the calm, there was a hidden tension, a whisper of secrets waiting to emerge. As the passengers retired to their cabins, Poirot's little grey cells began their work. He walked slowly along the corridor, noting doors, locks, and the faint traces of perfume, cigar smoke, and cleaning polish. Everything spoke, if one knew how to listen. And Poirot, as always, did know. "Mon Dieu," he said under his breath. "Tonight, perhaps, a shadow will cross this elegant journey. But I, Hercule Poirot, shall see, shall understand, and the truth shall come to light." Little did anyone know that by dawn, The Winter Express would carry not only its passengers but also a dark secret, a murder yet to unfold. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Snow. The Winter Express roared steadily through the snowy landscape, its wheels striking the iron rails with a rhythmic precision that seemed almost hypnotic. The storm outside had grown heavier. Snowflakes hammered against the windows, and a cold wind rattled the train's exterior. Yet inside, the atmosphere was deceptively calm. The passengers, settled into their cabins or lounges, continued their quiet routines, reading, writing letters, or chatting in hushed tones. Hercule Poirot, ever observant, lingered in the lounge carriage, where a faint scent of pine from the holiday decorations mingled with the rich aroma of tobacco and the delicate perfume of the ladies. He sipped his tea, his gaze shifting subtly from one passenger to another. Each movement, each glance, seemed to tell a story he intended to understand. Victor Harrington, the wealthy businessman, was once again the center of attention. He sat in a corner of the lounge, fidgeting with a pocket watch, his brow furrowed, lips pressed tightly together. Clara Harrington hovered nearby, offering reassurances with her soft, melodic voice, yet there was an edge of nervousness in her laughter. Poirot noted the tension, as if the couple's outward civility masked an undercurrent of anxiety. Across the room, Lady Selina Whitmore had positioned herself by the window, observing the snowstorm with a critical eye. She was a woman accustomed to command, and she wielded her glance like a weapon, assessing each passenger as though they were pieces on a chessboard. Professor Braun, meanwhile, had retired into his notebook, furiously jotting notes in a cramped hand, and Anna Petrova sat quietly at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, as if contemplating the music that would never be played tonight. James O'Connell, the ever-curious journalist, approached Poirot with an eager smile. "Mr. Poirot, I hope you will forgive my intrusion, but have you noticed Harrington? There is something off about him. I caught him speaking in a low voice to the conductor. He seemed, how shall I put it, frightened." Poirot did not respond immediately. Instead, he allowed his gaze to linger on Victor, who now rose and walked toward the bar, his movements abrupt, hurried, almost furtive. "Ah," Poirot murmured. "Le petit homme is not at ease. And when a man is afraid, it is because he carries a burden, hidden, perhaps dangerous. We must watch, yes, but quietly. One must never startle the truth. The truth comes gently, like a snowflake upon the hand." As the train continued its journey through the storm, strange murmurs began to drift from the cabins. A muffled argument between two unseen voices in a neighboring car, the sound of doors closing abruptly, and the faint but distinct sound of someone moving hastily through the corridor. Poirot's keen ears caught it all. He could feel the subtle tension thickening in the air, like a winter fog pressing gently but insistently against the senses. By late evening, the lounge carriage was nearly empty, save for Poirot, Lady Selina, and a few passengers who lingered for warmth and conversation. Suddenly, the conductor hurried in, face pale beneath his uniform cap. "Excuse me, monsieur," he said, bowing slightly to Poirot. There is a problem. Mr. Harrington, he has not returned to his cabin. We fear something may have happened." Poirot's eyes narrowed, a small crease forming across his forehead. "Ah, très intéressant," he murmured, rising calmly. His movements were precise, measured, an outward serenity belying the alertness of his mind. "Lead me, s'il vous plaît. There is something to be discovered." The conductor led Poirot to Victor Harrington's cabin. The door was slightly ajar, the soft glow of a lamp spilling into the corridor. Inside, the scene was both quiet and alarming. Victor Harrington lay slumped in his chair, an expression of frozen surprise on his face, a half-empty glass of brandy on the table beside him. The room bore no obvious signs of struggle, yet Poirot's sharp eyes caught the faintest traces of powder on the carpet, a single overturned chair, and the subtle scent of almonds lingering faintly in the air. Poirot knelt beside the body, studying every detail. Mon Dieu, he whispered softly, almost to himself. This is no ordinary sleep. Non, there is calculation, method, and intention. Someone has been clever, too clever. And yet, a mistake has been made. Ah, yes, the little gray cells will find it. The conductor looked anxiously at Poirot. But what happened, monsieur? Could it have been an accident? Poirot shook his head gently. Accident? Non. This is a matter of human design. And soon, very soon, we shall discover whose design it is. For now, we must remain calm. Panic is the enemy of reason. As the snowstorm howled outside and the Winter Express plunged deeper into the frozen night, the passengers, unaware of the tragedy unfolding, went to their cabins, leaving Poirot alone with the quiet, chilling puzzle of Victor Harrington's mysterious demise. And thus, the first shadow fell across the Winter Express. Chapter 3: The First Clues. The Winter Express moved steadily through the storm, its wheels slicing through layers of snow with a rhythmic determination. Inside the train, the atmosphere was tense yet carefully restrained. Word of Victor Harrington's sudden death had spread among the staff, though the passengers had been kept in relative ignorance, ostensibly for their own comfort. Yet the news, even whispered discreetly, carries a weight that the most civilized of people cannot ignore. Hercule Poirot remained in Harrington's cabin, studying every detail with the calm intensity that had made him famous across Europe. The brandy glass, the faint trace of powder, the overturned chair, all were elements in a silent, precise story. He examined the victim's hands, noting the slight tremor frozen in their final position, and the neatly folded papers on the desk, undisturbed yet strangely significant. Non, Poirot murmured, his fingers lightly tracing a pattern on the table. There is intention here. A carefully executed plan, and yet a trace of error. Very subtle, but for the little gray cells, perfectly visible. The door opened softly, and Inspector Muller stepped in, his heavy boots making a muted sound on the polished floor. Monsieur Poirot, thank you for assisting. This is unusual. Mr. Harrington seemed well yesterday, and yet, here we are. Poirot rose gracefully, giving the inspector a sharp, assessing glance. Inspector, this is indeed unusual, yes. But in these circumstances, the mind must remain tranquil, focused. The criminal, asile exist, relies upon panic. We must not provide it. They walked together into the corridor, where a small gathering of passengers had begun to form, murmuring quietly amongst themselves. Clara Harrington appeared pale, her gloved hands trembling as she clutched a handkerchief. Poirot approached her gently. Mademoiselle Harrington, may I ask you a few questions? He said softly, his voice calm yet authoritative. I must understand the events leading to this unfortunate incident. Clara nodded, her voice quivering. I was in my cabin, reading, and Victor, he went to his cabin to make a phone call. He never came out. Poirot's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion of her, but in analysis. Ah, yes. And this call, it is regular? Or was it unusual? Clara hesitated. Unusual. He was nervous more than usual. He whispered something to the conductor. I didn't hear it clearly. But he seemed frightened. Poirot's mind ticked, the wheels of deduction turning in silence. Frightened, he murmured to himself. A man in fear often carries a secret. And a secret can kill. Meanwhile, Poirot moved from passenger to passenger, subtly observing gestures, expressions, and alibis. Lady Selina Whitmore, her posture immaculate, claimed she had spent the evening by the window, watching the snow. Professor Braun insisted he had remained in his cabin, absorbed in his notes. Anna Petrova had been quietly at her piano, and James O'Connell had wandered between carriages, taking notes. Each statement was precise, carefully measured, and yet Poirot's eyes caught inconsistencies that would be invisible to most. A slight tremor in the professor's hands, a hesitant glance from Lady Selina, a careless slip in O'Connell's story, all small yet meaningful. Poirot returned to Victor Harrington's cabin, crouching once again by the brandy glass. This glass, it has traces of cyanide. The almond smell, unmistakable. He looked up, calm and composed, yet inwardly impressed by the audacity of the crime. Clever. And yet not clever enough. The killer left traces that will betray them. A soft knock came at the door. It was the conductor. Monsieur Poirot, should we inform the passengers fully? Poirot shook his head gently. Not yet. We must proceed quietly, carefully. The mind of a criminal is a delicate thing. Haste will only make them careless. And we do not wish for carelessness, we wish for truth. As the night deepened and the winter express plunged further into the storm, Poirot worked silently. Every trace, every shadow, every whispered rumor aboard the train became a thread in the web of deduction. Somewhere among the passengers, a murderer hid in plain sight. And Hercule Poirot, with the calm precision of a master craftsman, was determined to unravel the threads before the train reached its final destination. By the time the clock struck midnight, the train seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the snowstorm raged. Inside, suspicion and unease had begun to settle like frost over the passengers' hearts. And in that stillness, Poirot knew one certainty: the truth, however carefully concealed, would reveal itself soon. Chapter 4: Secrets Behind Closed Doors. The storm outside showed no sign of relenting. Snow swirled against the windows like a living, restless sea, blurring the landscape into a white, endless void. Inside the winter express, the passengers felt the isolation of the journey more acutely than ever. Locked in a moving palace of polished wood and brass, they were now prisoners of circumstance, cut off from the world beyond the rails. Hercule Poirot moved with deliberate care through the corridors, his eyes flicking from one cabin door to another. He carried a small notebook, though he wrote sparingly, preferring the observations stored firmly within his meticulous memory. The cabin of Victor Harrington had already been examined, yet Poirot returned one last time, noting the precise position of every object, the faint smudge of fingerprints on the drawer, and the subtle indentation on the armchair where the victim had sat. Ah oui, Poirot murmured softly. Details. The key to the mind of a criminal is in the details. Everything else is illusion. He began his systematic interviews, inviting passengers individually to quieter sections of the train. Clara Harrington was first, her composure slightly restored after the initial shock. Clara, mon ami, Poirot said gently. I must ask, did Victor have enemies? People he feared or with whom he had disputes? Clara hesitated, biting her lip. I don't know. Perhaps business rivals, but nothing dangerous. At least, I thought nothing dangerous. He was uneasy this week, though, more than usual. Poirot's eyes narrowed subtly. Unease, that is important. Did he confide in you the nature of this fear? Clara shook her head. No. He insisted it was nothing, just business matters. I didn't think to press him. From there, Poirot moved to Lady Selina Whitmore, who received him with polite curiosity. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I had nothing to do with Mr. Harrington's affairs, she said sharply. But even as she spoke, her fingers fidgeted with the lace of her gloves, a tiny gesture betraying discomfort. Yes, but one does not always act openly, Poirot replied softly. The mind, Lady Selina, it speaks, even when the mouth is silent. Professor Emile Braun was next. Poirot observed the man with a quiet intensity, noting how the historian's notes were almost obsessively neat, yet some pages had smudges, erasures, and slight inconsistencies. Professor, Poirot began, you were writing until late tonight? Indeed, Braun replied, his voice tight. Research notes. Very tedious work. And your observations of Mr. Harrington? Poirot pressed gently. Any interactions of note? Braun's dark eyes flickered briefly toward the floor. Only that he seemed preoccupied. That is all. Poirot made no comment, merely noting the hesitation. Subtle clues, he thought. In these hesitations lay the threads of truth. Even James O'Connell, the journalist, provided more than he realized. His insistence on recounting every movement between carriages, every overheard remark, seemed at first meticulous, but Poirot noticed contradictions, slight variations in timing and sequence. Small, almost invisible, yet telling. Finally, Poirot visited Anna Petrova, the pianist. She sat by the window, staring at the drifting snow, her hands folded in her lap. "You were alone?" Poirot asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "I play my music, I think, I watch the snow. I do not speak much." "Mon ami," Poirot said gently. "Silence is not absence. It is a language. And I hear many languages here." She met his eyes briefly, a flicker of understanding passing between them, then returned to the snow. Poirot made his notes in his mind and returned to the lounge carriage, where the conductor awaited. "Conductor," he said softly, "ensure no one leaves their cabins tonight. There may be consequences if the guilty is allowed to act." The conductor nodded, aware that Poirot's calm contained a powerful authority. As the night deepened, Poirot reflected quietly. The storm outside mirrored the storm of human emotion inside the train: fear, suspicion, hidden motives, and secrets. Each passenger carried a mask, yet the smallest gestures, the tiniest errors, revealed truths the mind must grasp with care. Poirot returned to Victor Harrington's cabin one final time before retiring himself. He studied the overturned chair, the faint powder on the carpet, the untouched documents. One small detail caught his attention: a scrap of paper, almost invisible, tucked beneath the desk. He retrieved it carefully and read its contents, a partially written message, cut short, mentioning a meeting, a time, and a name that was familiar, yet not quite. "Ah oui," Poirot whispered to himself. "The web begins to show its pattern. Soon, my friends, very soon, the truth will emerge from the shadows. Patience. Calm. Observation." And as the Winter Express hurtled through the snowy night, the passengers slept, unaware that their secrets were slowly unraveling. By morning, Poirot would have gathered enough to begin piecing together the puzzle. And somewhere on this train, a murderer watched silently, unaware that the little gray cells were already on their trail. Chapter 5: Motives and Misgivings. The storm outside had grown fiercer, snow now driving against the train's windows with the force of tiny icy missiles. The Winter Express seemed suspended in a world of white, its passengers cocooned inside, each trapped within their own thoughts, their own fears. The news of Victor Harrington's death had begun to circulate more broadly among the staff, though the passengers were only vaguely aware that something unusual had occurred. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the observation car, the gentle rocking of the train beneath him offering both comfort and clarity. He had spent the day quietly questioning, observing, and mentally cataloging every detail. Each gesture, each hesitation, each word spoken, or withheld, was now a thread in a complex web. "Ah, mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "So many hearts, so many secrets. Each passenger carries a motive, hidden perhaps even from themselves. It is my task to illuminate it, to bring the hidden into the light." Poirot began to summarize his observations. Clara Harrington, outwardly composed, had a tremor in her hands when discussing her husband. Lady Selina Whitmore's carefully measured statements masked a sharp curiosity, almost predatory in its subtlety. Professor Braun had been unusually anxious, scribbling notes, as though to distract himself from something he feared to recall. Anna Petrova remained quiet and enigmatic, her eyes deep with unspoken thought. And James O'Connell, though seemingly helpful, had presented small inconsistencies in his accounts, suggesting either carelessness or concealment. The detective then returned to the scrap of paper discovered in Victor's cabin. The partial message was curious, a note referencing a clandestine meeting in Vienna, a reference to money, and a name that seemed vaguely familiar. Poirot considered the implications. This suggests not only premeditation, but also a connection beyond this train. Victor Harrington feared something, or someone, and that fear led to his death. Poirot began quietly questioning passengers again, this time focusing on relationships, past encounters, and possible grievances. He found that Victor had been involved in several business ventures abroad, some of which had left rivals aggrieved. One, in particular, had been a consortium of shipping magnates with a history of cutthroat dealings. Poirot made a note: Victor's death may have been a personal act of revenge. Yet the puzzle was more subtle. The method of death, cyanide delivered carefully, leaving few traces, suggested someone with knowledge and calm precision. Poirot considered each passenger, weighing motive against opportunity and capability. In the lounge carriage, he found James O'Connell seated, scribbling furiously in his notebook. "Monsieur O'Connell," Poirot began softly, "may I ask, did you notice any behavior among the passengers today that seemed out of place?" O'Connell looked up, eyes gleaming. "Well, yes, now that you mention it. Lady Selina was unusually attentive when Victor spoke with the conductor earlier. She didn't say much, but her glances, precise, calculated. And Professor Braun seemed nervous, almost guilty. I thought it odd." Poirot nodded, eyes narrowing. The guilty often give themselves away in small gestures. But one must look beyond the obvious. The truth is never obvious." Lady Selina herself entered quietly, as though summoned by some invisible force. Poirot greeted her politely. "Lady Selina, may I ask, did you notice anything unusual in Mr. Harrington's behavior this evening?" She smiled faintly, her eyes sharp. "He was anxious, yes. But anxious men are not uncommon." "You are suggesting, Monsieur Poirot, that anxiety itself is a clue?" "Mais non," he replied gently. "Anxiety is only the shadow, the light is what lies behind it. And that light, very soon, will reveal everything." Later, Poirot returned to Victor Harrington's cabin, now cleaned and orderly, though the faint smell of almonds lingered. He studied the positioning of the papers, the untouched brandy glass, and the faint indentation in the carpet from a chair. One detail caught his eye: a small, nearly imperceptible smudge on the lock of the cabin door, almost as if someone had touched it hastily, perhaps in a moment of nervousness. "Ah," Poirot whispered. "A touch, a mark, a clue. Small, subtle, yet telling. Whoever did this did not consider every detail. They thought themselves clever, but no one is cleverer than the little gray cells." That night, as the train plunged further into the storm, tension simmered among the passengers. Sleep was uneasy, shadows seemed to linger longer, and every creak of the train echoed like a threat. Poirot retired to his cabin, his mind alive with connections and conjectures. Motives had been revealed, secrets uncovered, but the puzzle was not yet complete. He lay awake, thinking of the scrap of paper, the traces of cyanide, and the subtle inconsistencies in the passengers' stories. Somewhere among them was a murderer, hiding in plain sight, counting on the storm and the isolation to shield them from suspicion. "Patience, mon Dieu, patience," Poirot murmured. "The criminal believes themselves safe. And yet, soon, all will be revealed." Outside, the Winter Express continued its journey through the blizzard, silent, relentless, carrying its precious cargo of secrets, fears, and now, a deadly crime that demanded resolution. Chapter 6: Threads of Deception. The Winter Express had slowed slightly as it climbed a steep, snow-laden pass. Outside, the storm raged relentlessly, reducing the world to a blur of white and shadow. Inside, the passengers felt the storm's isolation keenly. The train had become not just a mode of travel but a sealed world, a theater for secrets, anxieties, and the dark presence of a murderer among them. Hercule Poirot walked the corridor with measured steps, his mind alive with observation. Each passenger had now been questioned multiple times, every gesture and word carefully noted. He had begun to see patterns, tiny inconsistencies in statements, subtle signs of tension, and traces of hidden motives. The tapestry of this murder, once tangled, was now beginning to reveal its design. He returned once more to Victor Harrington's cabin. The brandy glass, the faint almond scent, the overturned chair, they were all pieces of the puzzle. And yet, one subtle element had eluded immediate attention: the position of the victim's papers. Some were carefully stacked, others slightly askew, as if handled in haste. Poirot's small, precise fingers traced the edges, noting a faint fingerprint smudge, too small to be obvious, but revealing in the light of careful inspection. "Ah, yes," Poirot murmured softly. "The criminal is clever, but not infallible. Every act leaves a trace. Every fear, a mark." Later, in the lounge carriage, he began a series of quiet, almost casual conversations with passengers, using his subtle charm to draw out the smallest admissions. Lady Selina Whitmore, ever poised, revealed more than she realized. "I confess," she said lightly, "that I have observed Mr. Harrington closely. He was a man of considerable ambition. Perhaps too much ambition. And ambition," Poirot replied softly, "can sometimes create enemies." "Yes. But not all enemies kill." Professor Braun, pressed gently, admitted to noticing Harrington's unusual correspondence in the days before the journey, a series of letters marked urgent, hidden, and partly destroyed. "I saw only fragments," Braun said, voice tight. "But it suggested a financial dispute. A meeting in Vienna. Something clandestine." Poirot's eyes sparkled with interest. "Ah, yes. And did these letters mention anyone specifically? A name?" Braun hesitated, then whispered a name, barely audible. "Lothar." Poirot's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile. "Merci, Professor. A clue, yes, an important clue." Meanwhile, James O'Connell, eager to assist, revealed more than he intended. In describing his movement through the train, he accidentally contradicted a previous account, suggesting he had visited the observation car at a time he had claimed to be in his own cabin. Poirot noted it quietly, filing the information away like a key waiting for the right lock. Even Clara Harrington contributed, revealing that Victor had seemed unusually anxious about a certain passenger, Professor Braun. She had overheard fragments of hushed conversation, mentioning money threats and fear. Though she did not understand the full context, the information added another thread to Poirot's intricate tapestry. Poirot retired to his cabin late in the night, considering all the pieces. The storm outside had intensified. The wind rattled the windows and shook the train, yet inside, the real storm was human. Fear, deception, ambition, and guilt swirled invisibly among the passengers, and the murderer's confidence still lingered, unaware of the detective's growing certainty. He studied his notes, laying out motives, timelines, and inconsistencies. Each passenger had secrets, each had opportunity. Yet only one thread connected all elements: the precision of the murder, the subtle traces of cyanide, the hidden communications, and the faint fingerprint smudge. The criminal was meticulous, intelligent, and calculating. "Yes, patience," Poirot whispered to himself, eyes gleaming in the dim light. "The little gray cells see everything. The lies, the half-truths, the carefully constructed facade, all will unravel. Very soon, we shall know the hand behind this crime. And justice, justice will be served." Outside, the snowstorm continued, relentless and blinding. Inside, the Winter Express carried its fragile cargo of human drama, each passenger unwittingly inching closer to the revelation that would change everything. The threads of deception were taut, the mystery deepening, and the night long. But Hercule Poirot, as always, was calm, confident, and ready to see the truth emerge. Chapter 7: A Second Shadow. The Winter Express was now deep in the heart of the mountains, the snowstorm reaching a furious crescendo. Outside, wind and ice lashed the carriages, while inside, the warm glow of lamplight did little to dispel the growing unease. The isolated train felt like a vessel suspended in time, carrying not just passengers, but secrets, lies, and now, an invisible menace. Hercule Poirot moved quietly through the corridor, his cane tapping softly against the polished floor. The murder of Victor Harrington had unsettled everyone aboard, though most tried to maintain composure. Even so, the tension was palpable, a subtle vibration in the air that Poirot, with his keen senses, could feel like a physical presence. Poirot had spent the day piecing together fragments, motives, small contradictions, the scrap of paper from Victor's cabin, and the faint trace of cyanide. But something told him the crime was not yet fully revealed. The murderer had acted once, perhaps they were bold enough to act again. His intuition was correct. Late in the evening, a sudden commotion erupted in the dining car. A scream, sharp and trembling, echoed through the train, followed by hurried footsteps and the clatter of chairs. Poirot arrived swiftly, his eyes scanning the scene with calm precision. At the center stood Anna Petrovna, the Russian pianist, pale and shaken. On the floor before her lay a small vial, its contents spilled, the label partially broken. Someone had attempted to tamper with her belongings. Poirot bent down, examining the vial carefully. Cyanide. The same lethal poison that had claimed Victor Harrington. "Ah, mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "The criminal is bold indeed. But in their boldness they leave traces. And we shall find them." Anna Petrovna, still trembling, explained in a quiet voice. "I returned to my cabin, and found this on the table. I did not touch it. I do not know who could have done this." Poirot nodded, his mind already assembling the pieces. "No matter, mademoiselle. You are unharmed, thanks to your prudence. But the act reveals intent. It is very telling. Someone desires to create fear, to silence, perhaps even to cover past actions." The passengers, now aware that danger might extend beyond Victor Harrington, whispered anxiously among themselves. Lady Selina Whitmore's sharp gaze scanned the room, James O'Connell's curiosity seemed tinged with unease, and even Professor Brown's calm exterior betrayed tension. Poirot called the conductor aside. "Conductor, ensure that all cabins are secured. No one enters or leaves without permission. The murderer is still among us. They are clever, yes, but they underestimate the observation of the little gray cells." He then addressed the gathering. "Mess Amos, the night is not yet over, and events have revealed that a shadow moves among us. But do not fear. Calm observation, attention to detail, and honesty, these will illuminate the truth. And the truth is, inevitably inevitable." Poirot retreated to a quiet corner of the observation car, where he could survey the passengers without interruption. He reviewed his mental map of the journey, noting every movement, every statement, every minor discrepancy. The attempted attack on Anna Petrovna, unlike the murder of Victor Harrington, had been interrupted, leaving evidence and, more importantly, an opportunity to observe reactions. He recalled Clara Harrington's anxiety, Lady Selina's attentive glances, Professor Brown's erasures in his notes, and O'Connell's inconsistent statements. Patterns emerged. A web of fear, ambition, and calculation was now visible, threads connecting actions to possible motives. And one thread, subtle but distinct, pointed towards someone who had been present, observing, and waiting for the right moment. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yes, patience, patience. The criminal has shown their hand twice. That is the mistake. And with patience, the hand may be revealed fully." As the Winter Express plunged further into the snowy night, the passengers retired to their cabins with uneasy thoughts. Some whispered behind closed doors, some stared silently at the white storm outside. And somewhere within the train, a murderer counted on the storm's isolation and the passengers' fear to shield them. But Hercule Poirot, calm and unflinching, observed all. He did not need panic, nor haste. The little gray cells were at work. The threads of deception were being pulled together. And soon, very soon, the shadow among them would be exposed. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. The storm outside had begun to abate slightly, though the landscape remained buried under heavy snow, an endless expanse of white. Inside the Winter Express, tension was at its peak. The attempted poisoning of Anna Petrovna had shaken the passengers deeply. Whispers circulated like shadows, glances were sharper, and every movement seemed fraught with hidden meaning. Hercule Poirot sat in the lounge carriage, observing quietly. He sipped his tea with the same meticulous care as ever, though his mind worked tirelessly. Each gesture, each word, each hesitation from the passengers had been catalogued. And now, after careful analysis, the web of deception was beginning to unravel. He summoned the passengers, one by one, under the pretense of informal conversation. The first was Lady Selina Whitmore, whose sharp wit could no longer mask the slight tremor in her voice. Poirot observed her closely. "Lady Selina," he began, in his soft yet commanding tone, "you are a woman of keen observation. You notice Victor Harrington's fear. You notice the interactions among the passengers. Tell me, did you observe anyone acting unusually tonight?" Lady Selina's eyes flickered. "Unusually? I suppose Professor Braun seemed nervous. And James O'Connell moved with peculiar attention." Poirot nodded subtly, though inwardly he considered the reactions carefully. The truth was never in what people said outright, but in what they hesitated to say. Next, he spoke to Professor Braun. The historian had become increasingly anxious since the attempted attack on Anna Petrova. "Professor," Poirot said gently, "you have been very meticulous in your notes. But meticulousness does not always conceal anxiety. Tell me, did you see or hear anything unusual today?" Braun hesitated, then muttered, almost to himself, The letters. Harrington, he was involved with someone in Vienna. Lothar, and money. Secrets, terrible secrets." Poirot's eyes gleamed. The threads are connecting. Lothar, the letters, the fear. Everything points to a calculated plan. But someone underestimated the importance of observation. That is where the little gray cells will act. James O'Connell was next. The journalist, eager to appear helpful, recounted his movements between carriages again, but this time, Poirot carefully pointed out discrepancies. "Monsieur O'Connell, you stated earlier that you visited the observation car at 9 o'clock. Yet you also claim to be in your cabin at the same hour. Perhaps your memory is imperfect?" O'Connell's face flushed. I may have misremembered. It was confusing with all the chaos." Confusing, but confusion can be a cloak, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot said softly. His gaze lingered on O'Connell, though he considered him unlikely to be the murderer. Small contradictions often pointed to fear, guilt, or simple human error. Finally, Poirot called Clara Harrington and Anna Petrova together. The two women exchanged nervous glances as Poirot spoke. "Ladies, Victor Harrington's death was no accident. And the attempt upon Mademoiselle's safety was deliberate. Yet the criminal has left clues, invisible to the untrained eye. But to the trained mind, everything is revealed." Poirot paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "One person among us has carefully plotted, and yet, they cannot hide from the meticulous observation of the little gray cells. Every touch, every hesitation, every movement has been noted. The threads converge. Soon, the truth shall be exposed." He then returned to the scene of Victor Harrington's murder. Studying the small details once more, the smudge on the door, the position of the chair, the faint scent of almonds, he began to see the complete pattern. The murderer had acted in haste only once, leaving minute traces that revealed both motive and opportunity. "Yes, the plan was clever," Poirot murmured. "But even clever plans leave a signature. The human hand cannot be perfected, n'est-ce pas? And it is here, in the imperfections, that truth hides, and that the little gray cells shall uncover." As the winter express wound through the snowy mountains, the passengers retired to their cabins with uneasy hearts. Each was a potential suspect in Poirot's discerning eyes. Outside, the storm still whispered its relentless song. Inside, tension and anticipation thickened like the frost on the windows. And Hercule Poirot, calm and precise, prepared for the decisive moment, the confrontation when deception would fall away, and the murderer would be unmasked before the entire train. Chapter 9: The Revelation. The Winter Express was quiet now, the storm outside having softened into a gentle flurry that dusted the snow-covered mountains with a pale, serene light. Inside, the tension was electric. Every passenger had been called to the lounge carriage under the pretense of a late-evening gathering. The room, softly lit, felt heavy with anticipation, as though it itself sensed the truth about to be revealed. Hercule Poirot stood near the window, his small, precise frame radiating calm authority. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the gathered passengers: Clara Harrington, pale but composed; Lady Selina Whitmore, maintaining her poise though her eyes betrayed curiosity and concern; Professor Braun, shoulders tense, fingers clenching; James O'Connell, alert yet visibly uneasy; and Anna Petrova, still shaken but resolute. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice measured, almost musical in its clarity. "Tonight, we have witnessed events most distressing. Victor Harrington's death, and the attempted harm to Mademoiselle Anna Petrova, were not accidents. They were the acts of one amongst us, a mind calculating, a hand precise, a heart motivated by greed, fear, and revenge." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Each passenger shifted, uneasy, as Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering ever so slightly on each individual. "Let us consider the facts," he continued. "Victor Harrington received threats, was unusually anxious, and was carrying secrets that others sought to exploit. The method of his death, cyanide, requires knowledge and boldness. And yet the criminal made mistakes, leaving clues visible to the observant eye." Poirot moved toward Victor's cabin door, now part of the carriage itself, indicating the subtle traces he had noted: the overturned chair, the faint powder on the carpet, and the smudge on the lock. "These are not accidents. Every detail speaks, every mark whispers a story. And the story, Miss Amos, is clear." He turned sharply, eyes locking on Professor Emile Braun. "Professor Braun, your nervousness, your scribbled notes, and the fragment of the letter you revealed, Lothar, Vienna, money, all point to you. You alone had both the motive and the means. Victor Harrington had discovered that you had been embezzling funds, diverting money in secret, and you feared exposure. The storm, the train, the isolation, all seemed perfect for your plan. But you underestimated the little gray cells." Braun's face turned ashen. "Impossible. Poirot! You have no proof!" Poirot smiled gently, serene yet unyielding. "Proof, Professor, is in the details. The smudge on the cabin door, your fingerprints in a place you thought clever, the letters you attempted to hide, the timing of your movements, contradicted by O'Connell's observations, and most importantly, the attempt on Mademoiselle's safety, which failed, leaving a trace of cyanide and a pattern of intent unmistakable to one trained in observation." Braun staggered backward, his carefully constructed composure crumbling. I only meant to scare him. I didn't. You intended, yes," Poirot said softly, "to remove a threat to yourself by eliminating Mr. Harrington. Yet in your haste, your arrogance, you left the threads visible. And here, Miss Amos, the truth is laid bare." Clara Harrington let out a quiet, relieved sigh. Anna Petrova's dark eyes shone with quiet gratitude. Even Lady Selina Whitmore's sharp gaze softened slightly, acknowledging Poirot's mastery. Poirot continued, walking slowly around the room. "The storm outside, the isolation of this train, the careful planning, all failed against observation, intelligence, and methodical analysis. The little gray cells, they see what the eyes miss. They perceive what the heart conceals." Braun, now trembling, sank into a chair. I never meant. I am sorry." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Regret is a poor remedy, Professor. The consequences of one's actions are inescapable. And now, justice will take its course." As the train began its descent from the snowy passes, a sense of calm replaced the earlier tension. The passengers, though still shaken, felt relief. Order had returned, reason had triumphed, and the Winter Express, despite the tragedy it had borne, would continue its journey with clarity restored. Poirot, standing by the window, gazed at the fading snowstorm. "Ah, mon Dieu," he murmured softly. "Human nature is complex, yes. Greed, fear, desperation, yet always truth endures. The little gray cells have triumphed once more." And in the quiet aftermath, as the Winter Express carried its passengers towards safety and resolution, Hercule Poirot allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The mystery was solved. The murderer unmasked, and the shadows that had haunted the journey dissipated like the snowflakes outside. Chapter 10: Resolution and Reflection. The Winter Express rolled steadily now, the storm finally spent, leaving the mountains and forests cloaked in a peaceful blanket of snow. The world outside was quiet, pristine, and serene, yet inside the train, the echoes of recent events lingered. Victor Harrington's tragic death had shaken the passengers, but Hercule Poirot's careful work had restored order and clarity. In the lounge carriage, the atmosphere was calm. The passengers, still recovering from tension and fear, spoke in hushed tones. Clara Harrington, seated near the fire, reflected quietly, the grief in her eyes softened by relief. Anna Petrova, now composed, ran her fingers lightly over her piano keys, letting music soothe the lingering unease. Lady Selina Whitmore sipped tea elegantly, maintaining her poise, while James O'Connell quietly jotted notes, perhaps already contemplating the story he would write. Poirot, small, precise, and serene, observed them all. "Ah, mon Dieu," he murmured softly to himself. "Human nature, frail yet intricate. Greed, fear, ambition, and yet courage, honesty, and observation restore balance." He turned to Clara Harrington. "Mademoiselle, the truth is revealed. Victor Harrington's death, though tragic, has illuminated the secrets that festered unnoticed. Now, with Professor Braun in custody, peace may return, both to your heart and to this journey." Clara's lips quivered in a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You saw everything. You understood even what we could not." "Mais oui," Poirot said gently. "The little gray cells, they perceive what the heart conceals. And even in darkness truth may be found. That is why we must always observe, reflect, and remain calm." Outside, the snow glimmered in the morning light, a new day promising hope and quiet. Inside, the Winter Express hummed steadily along the rails, carrying its passengers toward their destinations, each now touched by the events of the journey and the clarity brought by Poirot's brilliance. Lady Selina Whitmore approached Poirot, a rare softness in her voice. "Monsieur Poirot, your work is extraordinary. I have never witnessed such precision and calm." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "It is not extraordinary, Lady Selina. It is the result of method, observation, and patience. Chaos may surround us, but the mind, if trained and disciplined, finds truth even in the storm." James O'Connell, ever the inquisitive journalist, leaned forward. "And the others? The passengers who watched, who feared? How do they find peace after such a journey?" Poirot smiled gently. "By understanding that even in fear, justice may prevail. By observing, reflecting, and appreciating the order that can arise from disorder. And by cherishing the quiet moments, the music, the companionship, and the calm." Anna Petrova's fingers traced a gentle melody across the piano, filling the lounge with soft, soothing notes. The sound seemed to melt the last remnants of fear, tension, and grief. As the Winter Express continued through the snow-laden landscape, Poirot allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The mystery had been solved. The criminal unmasked. And above all, calm had been restored. Outside, sunlight began to pierce the clouds, glinting off the frozen trees and sparkling snow. Inside, the passengers, each in their own way, felt the weight of the journey lift. The Winter Express, once a vessel of tension and secrets, had become a symbol of resolution, understanding, and the triumph of observation over deception. Poirot leaned back in his seat, small hands folded neatly, and murmured to himself with serene contentment, "Ah, the little grey cells have triumphed once more. And in the quiet, in the reflection, in the calm, the world feels right again." And with that, the train rolled on, carrying its passengers, its secrets resolved, into the gentle embrace of a new day.